allow me to introduce Dave Korsunsky, right here, CEO and founder of Heads Up Health. Dave makes an awesome platform that you're just about to hear about as we go on through onto that side. But he's also a damn good friend. And I came to Dave, and I come from the hospitality industry, and I had no idea how to build an API. And he said, I can hook you up. My name is Dorian Greenow. I'm the founder of Keto Mojo, and our goal is to have, thank you, the most affordable testing available for the ketogenic community. And we are dedicated to you. So if you ever have any ideas or need anything, please contact me because we're here to help.
Thank you, Mr. Mojo. I can't hang with the British accent, but I will do my best. So we'll just start off on the importance of data, how it can actually completely change the way we manage our health, and actually why we need that now more than ever. We'll then look at the tool sets that are available from companies like Heads Up Health, Keto Mojo, Chronometer, other companies that are here and building the technology that is actually empowering us to do this ourselves and to work with the practitioners that are helping us on this low-carb journey. And then we're going to look at some of the top metrics that I see our users measuring in our system and how they're using that information to manage their health.
I love this one. Measure, manage, magnify. Measurement is the first step that leads to control. If you can control something, you can improve upon it. And this is what we're all about. I mean, without having a data point that is there, you cannot adjust from where you are. So you really need to know exactly where you are in your journey that is unique to you. So we believe in measuring so that you can manage it, and then you can magnify those results so that will come into play. And you can then also bring that magnifying glass and share that with everybody that is in the community. I'm going to do this stuff.
Well, that's well executed, Dorian. So this is fundamentally what I believe, which is why do we need to start managing this information ourselves? Why do we have to fly to San Diego, listen to all of these world-class speakers to try to ensure that we do not come down with a chronic disease? The odds are not in our favor in terms of type 2 diabetes, cancer, and others. So why does it have to be this hard? Why do we have to measure all of this stuff? Well, when we look at industry, there are companies making food products who put people in fMRI machines to see what combinations of foods are going to light up the reward circuits in our brain the most. And these fMRI machines, $300,000. I don't have an fMRI machine to tell me what not to eat. I'm just trying to feed myself and my family, but the technology going into the food is designed to make this as hyper palatable as possible. This is what Rob Wolf talked about in his book. It hijacks the reward circuits in our brain. So we have to understand what's going on there. And then inadequate screening. When you go to the doctor for a physical, they're not running a lot of the tests that can be predictive. Fasting insulin, LPII scores, lactate dehydrogenase that used to be on the routine physical. These tests are not on the panels anymore. If we don't ask for them as empowered patients, we don't get them. And these are the signs that can help us many years or decades before an actual disease manifests itself. So these are some of the challenges that everybody faces. Combine that with sedentary behavior, whereas the food that we eat now maybe didn't have as much of an effect when we were out there doing physical labor for 8 hours a day. And so as we become more sedentary, that same type of dietary intake causes more adverse effects on the body. And information overload. This poor gentleman just asked how much protein he should eat on a keto diet on Facebook. And his head exploded. But think of it as a newbie, right? When you're a newbie, it's like, holy, where do I even start on all this stuff? So yeah, it's overwhelming. And this is what we're up against, each and every one of us. And so what can we do to push back? Well, we can use technology within our bodies, innate technology. Learning how to put our body into a state of nutritional ketosis. Learning about the power of fasting, intermittent fasting. learning things like meditation, learning how to use nutritional technologies, CBD oil, supplementation, psychedelics, and using technology, devices, apps, and consumer testing. As consumers here in the United States, we can go order any test we want online, no doctor required. They won't run your fasting insulin, go buy it yourself. They won't run your genetics, go to Nutrition Genome and buy it yourself. They won't run an organic acid test, you can get it done. This is all available directly to us. So these are the tools that we have available to us to start changing the odds in our favor. So that's why I do what I do, is to empower people to be able to have the tools to push back. And that's just a short view of my view of the world.
And so when you've got those tools, when you can go out and make sure that you can take a look at what is essentially your bio-individuality, we can come to the point of like saying, well, I can go and eat a banana and that's going to keep me out of ketosis. But that might not happen to somebody like this chap who's got a great set of guns, who's been doing a long run, and it will react completely differently. And this is what the famous Israeli study that came on out, that we're showing you right here, between the banana and the cookie there, is that people react in a different way. You know, we asked about how that person was mind blown about will protein kick you out of ketosis? Well, will it actually suppress some of your ketones? Now, perhaps if you are looking at this for optimal weight loss, it might be one thing. But if you're looking at it for a cancer treatment, do you really want to have your ketones suppressed when you're really trying to get that right GKI into play? So, age, sex, genetics, microbiome, all of these things have a disposition into play. And when you can start looking at your individual self and see what is right for you and your baseline, this is where the game gets completely changed. And this is what we're really focusing on getting that bio-individuality and being able to bring this data set so you can take control, because the tools are all out there. And now is the moment for us to try and bring that all together.
And just a bit on this cell study, for those who aren't familiar with it, they hooked up 800 people to continuous glucose monitors, measured everything they ate. And what they found was that two individuals had completely different glycemic responses to the exact same food. So we can't rely on the glycemic index, we can't rely on how many carbs are in the food. They actually found that it was very highly correlated to the gut microbiome, the species in our gut. By the end of the study, thanks to machine learning, they could actually predict your blood glucose response without you even having to eat the food. So that's the power of where we can go when we start to get a lot of data. Mr. Feldman knows this intimately well. Yeah, I can pull it up after, Miriam. So again, on the topic of bio-individuality.
So, white track. If we think about being able to really get into the data, this is where everything hides and then can be blown out and be shown into the light. It gives credibility and validation, as we have shown on this biz. But really, if we take a look at some of the epidemiological studies that come on out, a lot of this is like, oh, well, what did you eat last month? Especially the Franklin study is one of the classic ones, which was done with a group of nurses. So there's a bit of supposition here without actual true correlation, where if you can start to really bring in your macros and see what your glucose is doing, say for instance, at real time, if a doctor or a practitioner suddenly sees that blood glucose spike go up, they can ask themselves, why has this gone up? But if they can see real time that, hey, you had a Coca-Cola last night and an entire pizza, perhaps we can then also start using AI and send a little message saying, what's up? Perhaps we can help you. We need to keep you accountable. And when you start bringing people to be accountable, then what happens is you then start to change their habits. And when you can start changing the habits of people, then you can get them onto the path of eating in a healthy way. And that's what we're really looking to do. And this goal of ours together is we truly believe that we can have 5 million people where we can see what's going on with each of their individual macros. We can see what their glucose, we can see what's happening with their ketones. We can bring in the information of their weight, the size of their biceps, how much they've lost off their belly through the data set that they're recording. We can see how quickly their weight might drop off. They can bring in the DEXA scan, and we can show how much lean mass and whether or not they are or are not losing muscle mass. We can bring in their sleep. We can bring in their LabCorp measurements. We can bring in their Quest diagnostic measurements. Now you imagine for any clinician out there being able to bring in their acetone from level and being able to bring all of this data set and being able to mine that. What would that do to advance clinical studies in America and across the globe? And at the current rate at which we are going, when we launch the next generation of meters, we believe that we will have over 5 million data point, actually 5 million people that we can have randomized, anonymous data that you can mine. And that will be a game changer for anybody who's trying to bring and put a study together by 2020. That's the way I get 1.7 on my ketone.
Yeah, for a lot of people I talk to, this is the most rewarding part. They nerd out on the data. It's fun. If you're gonna nerd out on anything, nerd out on your health data. So that's a big part of just getting people engaged, getting them motivated, and most importantly, understanding, okay, I can't go to my doctor and get the instruction manual for this, so am I doing it right? Are my inflammation markers coming down? How is my lipid panel responding? Am I actually getting healthier as I do this? So, as nerdy as it is, it's also fun, and it also helps us know if we're actually moving in the right direction. So that's just the fun part of the tracking, as this gentleman here can attest to.
I'm going to add in a shameless plug. If you go to hashtag What's Your Mojo, every single day I see people posting up their ketones. I see people putting up their glucose and looking at their GKI. It's that daily affirmation when you test your ketones in the morning that what you're doing is right. And when you get that affirmation, you also then get the fact that you like going, oh, it's working. Because how many times have we stepped on the scales and that thing is just lied to us every single day? And you're like, how could I go up by 3 pounds? How could I be down by 4 pounds? It doesn't give you any real causation. So when you finally get that moment, you're like, yeah. And if you look at a lot of the studies, especially when Pavel talked with epilepsy, where they were finding that people were dropping out because they didn't keep themselves accountable. This is how we can keep people accountable and change those habits, because they get that affirmation. And I think this is the piece that will help any practitioner out there to have more success with their patients and their clients.
And I just want to add that I know a lot of people who are practitioners work with clients who get too obsessed with the data, and they start freaking out over every single measurement. And so rather than discourage those individuals, I think we need to educate people on how to properly interpret data.
Yeah.
And there might be a time where we just need to tell them to put the meter in the drawer for a few days and chill out. But that doesn't mean that there's not a tremendous amount of value to helping people understand how to use the information. So let's talk a little bit about how we can bring all of this information together. When you think about managing anything, your financial portfolio, you have tools that are pulling in beautiful charts and graphs and information. I can get the 52-week high on my stock in 5 seconds. How many people can get the 52-week high on their glucose in 5 seconds? Nobody. Because we don't think about managing our health the same way we think about managing other data. Healthcare is kind of the last industry to be disrupted. If you look at consumer finance, when banks 15 years ago started putting patient portals online, this radical technology where I could log in and pay a bill and check my balance, it was just a website. And then you had companies like Mint.com and QuickBooks that came along and said, well, we can just pull all your portals into one beautiful interface. So with Mint, you could connect 5 banks and see all of your transactional spending across all these different banks, even though the banks' systems themselves didn't talk to each other. They were all independent. You can't see your Chase transactions in your Bank of America account, but Mint allowed you to do that. So healthcare now, 20 years later, has finally got the memo, and they're starting to open up connections so that we as individuals can get access to our medical records and mash it up with all the data that we need to collect at home to really see what's going on. So that's a platform. So how do we build that for healthcare? Well, this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is what we're trying to do at Heads Up Health. One is help you get your medical records. So you can sign in, and there's over 30,000 medical providers in the United States. You can link up as many portals as you have that contain your health records. So for me, it's LabCorp, Quest, UCSF, Stanford. Those are the 4 places I've been to in my 42-year existence that have my blood work. So none of those systems talk to each other. So I have to log into all 4 of them separately and try to cobble something together. Ultimately, I made a spreadsheet to solve that problem. That was version 1 of Heads Up Health. And now we can start to do that electronically. So all your medical records will flow in, all the patient-generated data, whether it's macronutrients, Keto Mojo, some of the devices we have here that do things like heart rate variability, Oura Ring. Heart rate variability, we'll talk about that later. Thank you, Vanna. This is stuff that you used to have to go to the hospital and get hooked up with expensive machines to get this data, and now it's just available, 59 bucks, and a free app. So we're trying to mash it all up, basically, and then just get a bunch of smart nerds to start figuring out all the correlations and the patterns. But most importantly, what I need to know is what works for me, because it's completely different than what works for Dorian or for Lamont. So first of all, just get it all in one place, and then we can get the big brains on it to start doing some really cool stuff with it. But that's the larger vision for us. And then we'd like to put in a shameless plug here for the Keto Mojo device. So I met Dorian here last year, actually, and I said, Dorian, there is not a single blood ketone meter with an API. So for the love of God, please build one.
And we did. Dave asked, and we did. And so I'm going to attempt to do this quasi-live right now. You got that? Yeah. So we've created this little doodad that will turn every single meter that we have already sold, because we've already built it in to the middle. But you will place that in there, and I should have a little blue light will start blinking at me like that says, hey, we're ready to do that. Then I will basically go to my app, and Dave, you're on the 16th generation right now?
Something like that.
16th generation, and I will press sync on here. There we go. And my Bluetooth lights should go constant, and then all of a sudden, I will start to download all of my data. And as I start to download the data, let's bring that up.
Yeah, I think it already ran its course.
Ooh. Let's go back again, see if we can do it.
Yeah, the main thing is there's lots of Bluetooth glucometers out there. That's not new. Nope. But none that actually can do electronically sync the ketones, which is what a lot of clinicians need. Dr. Nation Winters, Miriam, others who are using therapeutic ketogenic diets need easy access to the ketone data, and there's currently no way to automatically sync that. Everybody's like manually entering it into different systems.
And boom, then we connect to Heads Up Health. We currently have like 50 people in beta that are trying to like put us through the ringer to make sure that we get it nice and clean, so when we actually launch, and we are targeting October 1st.
All the bug reports go to Dorian.
Yeah, so October 1st for when we will actually get the launch of this. And we truly believe that this will be the first part of what we call Project Stepping Stone, which is a game changer, which leads us to how practitioners can really start to pull in the data set.
Yeah, and how do we get this to the practitioners that know how to use this information? Again, this is not part of mainstream conventional medicine training, so there are practitioners that know how to properly interpret this information, and we want to make it as easy as possible for these individuals to get access to the information if they need it, if it's part of their treatment protocols.
Is this Scott Jurek, the Western States stuff we're looking at?
That actually was something that the graphic designer slapped on there, so I have no idea where he pulled that from.
I addressed that a little bit there.
Yeah.
So imagine you are a practitioner, and this is what Dave is working on right now, and which I'm passionate about and trying to help him with it. But imagine as a practitioner, you can search through all of your patients or your clients. You can be a health coach, you can be an athlete coach, you can be a doctor, an oncologist. And you can actually search by what is the more important markers that you've got. You might want to say, who are my most at-risk people who have got BGs that are over 140? You might want to make sure that for your cancer patients that you really want to get them into a GKI at that mountaintop of above 1. So you want to make sure, like, see how we're doing on that piece that is there. You might want to make sure that you are having the people getting the right amount of sleep. I mean, how many people really want to push? How many doctors say, oh, you get enough sleep? How many doctors actually even know if their people are getting enough sleep? And you go like, well, I know it's been a bit of a stressful time, but now you can actually see all of that. And now, through different pieces of the AI, which on that very convoluted slide that we had before, imagine then when you can say, you can choose the level of healthcare that you might want to have. You can have the AI healthcare that's just going to send you those messages every now and again when it sees the data points and it gets over a certain amount to say, take a look at this, you might want to do this. Then you get the second level that will come on in where you can have a nurse practitioner that's going to help you and give you that coaching. And then you can have the third, the top tier level where you're going to get the best doctors and the best minds like Dr. Nasha Winters that are coming in to make sure that you're keeping on top of that. And you can bring all of these three layers together to make sure that you get that bio-individualized for your needs, not the lowest common denominator.
So with that said, let's look at some nerdy data points.
Love that.
And the first one we want to look at is macros. And this is where everybody has to start. That's where I had to start. I had no idea what 20 grams of carbs was. And so this is also one of the areas where people seem to make the most mistakes. And so there's many times where I'll ask people, for example, what is their total caloric intake through the day? They may have no idea. Or they may just not be getting the results that they want, but they're not actually, they've never calculated their macros. They're just not doing that properly. And so some of the common pitfalls are just not even understanding what my base metabolic rate is. It depends on a number of different factors. It depends on your height, your weight, other things like that. So understanding what your base metabolic rate is. If you're trying to lose weight, making sure there's a deficit. If you're trying to put on muscle, making sure that there's enough protein and surplus. So these are really, really important numbers. It's very, very tedious, but it works. And so this is just one area where I see people making a lot of mistakes. Aaron's here, his product is probably the best because they're also doing the micronutrients where you can actually see all of that stuff and doing a very, very accurate job of it, where a lot of the other products on the market, that data is just not reliable.
Big shout out, Chronometer.
Yes. So we have to start there. Everybody has to start there. A lot of people come to me and ask where to even get started. My cousin, he's up in Saskatchewan, Canada, corn capital of the world. And I said, okay, Mike, first thing, get your carbs under 20 grams. Well, what the heck does that mean? I mean, that's where a lot of people are starting from. No concept whatsoever of measuring food. I didn't have any concept of it. So this is critically important, and it always changes as we evolve, as our body changes, as our goals change. First thing I did was I lost 20 pounds, and then I said, okay, maybe I took it down too far. I lost a lot of strength in the gym. So I think I actually had too much of a deficit. And so then I started changing things and started to put that muscle back on. So these are mistakes I made, but through tracking I was able to learn and correct those mistakes. So different for everybody, and I think that's just a really, really important part to emphasize. If you've guzzled 700 calories with the morning coffee and you're on a goal of 1,600 calories per day, that doesn't leave a lot of room for food. And so these are things that are not, yes, okay, I'm eating keto, but I've got too much caloric intake through the day, I'm not maintaining a deficit, that can affect results. So these are just some of the things I see in terms of people making mistakes and just some really simple tools that we can use to fix that.
That's you. A hand over to your blood sugar, you're fasted in the morning. So what is this going to kind of like look like? Well, boom, take a look at that. Then we move a little bit forward. You can see how now the dietary choices you're making, you can suddenly see how your BG is beginning to move down. So you're actually knowing instantly that the dietary choices you're making are having effect. It becomes the affirmation. and then suddenly you see as fasting, you can now really kind of like see that you're coming down below that 83, which is the optimal zone that you want to be in. But now you're fasted, you might even see it come down a little bit lower, getting into the 70s, maybe into another bit. And then cortisol. All right, you suddenly had to get up on stage. Probably like Carol, you had to do a little bit of a comedy session. Cortisol went through the roof, and you're like, oh my good gosh, well, you have to stand up here and speak if you're not really used to it, or you had some poor sleep. We heard about Dr. Nasha was talking about how many people weren't getting enough sleep, and that was a real marker for metabolic damage that was going on, and how could they correct that. But you can actually see that because the blood doesn't lie. Then you got postprandial sugar. All right, you just eaten, and all of a sudden that thing is going through the roof. It's going off like a rocket ship. You've really got to take that. You want to make sure that you're keeping your blood swings in glucose to under 30, so you make sure that you're not like mainlining glucose or fructose that's going to come into play. And then we come to, was that you?
This was me.
Yeah.
So just an experiment I did with postprandial blood sugar, and again, this goes back to that Israeli study where it's different for everybody. I wanted to test my favorite Vietnamese pho, which is like 3 blocks from my house. I love it. So I went to get the pho. I brought my keto mojo meter to the restaurant. I tested my blood sugar before eating the pho. 88, pretty good. Then I tested 1 hour afterwards, 150. Still pretty good. I like to be under 120 or 110. Still a pretty good jump, almost 30 points to Dorian's point, but I can live with it because I love the food. And then I tested at the 2 hour mark, and it started coming back down. Beautiful. And then I tested at the 3 hour mark, right back to where I was before I started. That is a favorable metabolic response for sit food. So I know that I can safely eat this. I did test it a couple more times, just to be sure. And then we, it's not about me, okay? It never was about me.
And N equals 100?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So then I had some of the Heads Up Health users actually do the challenge. You know, in Rob's book, he talks about doing the carb challenge. He gave 7 types of carbohydrates. Test them all. Right? Everybody's going to respond differently. So then I had this one woman. I shared my results from the pho in the Facebook group, and she said, you know, sometimes I like to have a piece of pizza.
Did you have a cheese crust?
That's a good question. I can't really tell. But she tested at the 1 hour mark, 125. 155.
Oh, man.
3 hour mark, the rocket ship was still climbing. So, please don't eat pizza. And this isn't something you feel, right? In some cases, you might have some physical symptoms. In other cases, it's completely difficult to deduce that this is happening. But for many people, this is happening 10, 15 times a day, especially kids. So this is why I'm hoping that continuous glucose monitors don't have to be prescribed. And you can just get something where you put tape on the wrist. I know that Apple and others are working on this, where everybody can learn these correlations without needing some invasive device or some Libre, and we can just learn, oh crap, I can't eat that, whatever it was, it just went to 180. And so if we can do this for society at large, I think this would be absolutely game-changing, where you just put the Apple Watch on, and it electrocutes you if you go above 120. Something like that. So we can all just be shocked into learning that we just can't eat this stuff on a regular basis. But anyhow, the importance of testing, and I digress.
So ketones. You have to learn what your baseline is and what your biological rhythm is. So I like to test about an hour after waking, so that we can actually negate some of the dawn phenomenon where you're going to have that cortisol spike that's going to come into play. I usually do my blood glucose first because it's a quick test, takes about 5 seconds, and then I will go and do my ketones. And I find that my ketones are lowest in the morning. So what that tells me is like, what happened last night? Did I go out for dinner? Was I enticed by that pizza? Did I have too much to drink?
Never, Dorian.
No. But that means what has happened from the previous night has had a direct effect, and I can say to myself, all right, my ketones are pretty low this morning. I tell you what, I'm going to spend this morning fasted. That's pretty easy. I can almost adjust straight away to what I need to do. Then I will then do a second test in the evening, just before my evening meal, to see what my ketones are and my glucose is going on at that time. And usually in the evening will be my highest ketones of the day. I find my ketones will rise up during the day and I get more energy and more energy. So whilst my competition is in a stupor after having a high carb lunch, I'm still like raging, I'm still like on it, I still got the energy, and that's how in lawyers and doctors and people that like if you're in NASA or even if you're a SEAL, this is how you win the game. Because they realize it's better to be in a state of ketosis where you have actually got this mental acuity. But then I also make use of the fact that I've measured my blood glucose. And then after, say, my breakfast, I can do another blood glucose measurement. And now I can see if that rocket ship happened. Do I have a problem with dairy? Should I really not have had that muffin at that breakfast time? And I can do the same again after I've had my evening with my blood glucose. And so this is how you can actually sleuth out the foods that are giving you a problem. Does too much protein give you a problem? Does the fact that you can actually have more carbs or less carbs? You can actually dial that in. And then there become these other levers that you can pull into play. If you're an athlete and you really want to work to your metabolic edge by being flex fueled and using 2 fuels, then you can test just before you begin your workout, and then you can test afterwards. Now, for instance, I was just chatting with Zach, who run the Western States. You know, it's only 100 miles across the Sierras. He does 3 marathons in once. But when he trains low carb, what he's looking to do is like, how do I work at a certain pace where my heart rate is round about 140 or below? What minute mile do I need to do so I can metabolize the fat that is on my body? And when he does a short race, 50 miles, that he doesn't actually have to eat anything because he's metabolizing the fat on his body as he actually needs it, and he's worked out how to get his metabolic edge. This is an incredible tool for an athlete to use to be dual fueled.
Define flex fuel.
So when you're flex fueled, it's like if you're using glucose and you're filled on carbohydrates, and you're say following Dr. Noakes when he was originally saying, hey, you need to carbo load, you can only use one fuel. You can only use glucose. But if you become ketogenic and you become fat adapted, now you can also use ketones. So for a high intensity athlete, and I'm going to use like a cyclist for instance that is doing the Tour de Cure, if you take a look at their water bottles, you will actually see a color coding on their water bottles. And what they've got in there is they might have exogenous ketones in one of those water bottles, or they might have cupric acid that's in there, C8, because that can give a really nice big boost on that one, and then they might have glucose in another one. And they're going to do precog and say, you know what, the coach is saying we need to do a breakaway right about now. The docents have been pushing really, really hard to get to tire out the competition. Then they pound the glucose, they wait till that glucose is mainstreamed, and then suddenly they go off like that. Should we live our lives in that way? No, because it's really, really, really hard on the body. I mean, these guys put themselves through so much to attain what is really the hardest thing in the world, to be the world champion. So they use the flex fuel to be able to bring that in there, and that then gives you the metabolic advantage against the competition. MMA fighters want to have power to weight ratios so that they can really lean off all of that fat, so they can make sure that they've got as much muscle as possible to hit as hard as possible as they can. So they use that. They even found that the Australian cricket team could actually reduce their weight so they could run faster to get to the ball. I had to have a bit of cricket in there because I am English. Maybe we should have more baseball players doing Aikido or hockey. We could definitely have that. So these are the things that come into play. We have Level in the room here. Lamont, big shout out to you. I really love your product. I think for athletes, looking at the acetone and what happens in that can be, it's a slightly different response to what we see in beta-hydroxybutyrate, which we measure in the blood. And when you're looking at those kind of like things, these then become the clear tools in which you can use to adapt yourself to the optimal way that you are trying, or what you're trying to achieve. So here's a great example, and thank you for advancing this on. Here we see a 0.5. You just entered into nutritional ketosis. Hey, we're at Ketopia, that's awesome. So on the Level machine, we're going to see about 8 to 10 parts per million. Was we correct on our data set there?
Yeah.
I love it when we're right on the data set. And here you can actually see as they're rising up through the day, we get up through that part, And so you can see a nice correlation between the two as we come on through. So you can make use of both of those tools to give the data set against the performance of what you're achieving through that day.
Yeah, I have both the level and the keto module at my house, and I've been able to find that these numbers actually correlate pretty good. Dr. Joe Anderson, he's the chief scientist at level, and I spoke with him, and he gave this correlation about 0.5, 80. It's not 100% of the time. 80% of people, when they hit 0.5 on blood, will be about 8 to 10 ppm. Lamont can correct me on that, but that's what Dr. Anderson said on the correlation there, and that's what I've noticed. There's a delay in the acetone. They show up in the blood first, and then about 3 to 6 hours later, is that right, Lamont? They'll start showing up in breath. Just for those who are curious about the correlation between the two, because that question comes up quite a bit. And then the GKI, this was Dr. Seyfried's marker when he was doing the brain cancer research, and in his laboratory he found it was actually more indicative if you looked at the ratio of the two numbers than either number in isolation, because sometimes glucose can go up even though the ketone numbers are still elevating, and vice versa. He said sometimes it was due to stress or different things people were eating. So he came up with this index, which is just simply the ratio of the two numbers. Now I have a ton of people I talk to who swear by this number. That's all they care about. I have other people who say, this is too confusing, I don't want to look at it. So everybody is motivated by different numbers. I'm not here to tell you which ones you should use. That number exists. A lot of people use it. Dom D'Agostino talks about the GKI a lot. Dr. Peter Attia, those two just went on a whole show about how to use this index. For other people, it's just not helpful.
Which show?
I think it was Peter's podcast, actually. They went on a rant about it, I think, recently, right? Yeah.
I just want to kind of like put this in context, and I actually really like this particular slide when we see the mountain. Like, one up there is like being at the top of Everest. It's really, really hard to get up there. To get a GKI of 1, you've got to really have 4 millimoles of ketones. That's raging ketones. And at the same time, you need to have a BG of roughly 72 to get there, which is 4 millimoles for the rest of the world. It's only America that uses MGDL. That's really hard to get to that point.
Unless you're 6.
Right.
It would be 3 days of water fasting to get there.
3 days of water fasting can do that. So I kind of like think it's really, really hard. It's a lot of work to get to the top of the mountain. But then you come down and you kind of like get up there in the sort of like anybody's in the Sierras, when you kind of like just get above the snow line there and you get that beautiful view that kind of comes on out. That's where you're looking in about like the that 3 ratio that we're getting in there. That's kind of like a nice spot to be in. You haven't had to work too hard, but that's pretty good for maybe a therapeutic use, maybe for neurological. That works really, really well in that respect. And then you've got this other area like the bottom of the foothills of the mountains where it's nice and rolling and you're just having a great little hike and everything's really nice. That's sort of like the optimal zone that you're looking for maybe weight loss in that way. So it's just like, for a cancer treatment, man, you've got to really try and get up there, and it's hard. But there's a real valid reason for that, because you want that treatment to work extremely well for you.
Just to add, I've spoken to Dr. Nasha, and a lot of her patients, this is too much for them to manage this number. I have other people on Heads Up Health, and the GKI is their number to stay in remission. Again, this is all, whatever numbers work for you is I think one of the main messages we want to communicate here.
Absolutely.
So the next one is lean mass. And you can see Arnie here helping this guy try to do some weightlifting, but the amount of muscle on our body, I'm not talking about the amount of fat we lose. I'm talking about muscle on the body, where we build lean muscle. This actually improves our insulin sensitivity, improves glucose utilization, increases base metabolic rate. I see a lot of people in the keto community who lose a lot of weight, and that is incredible. All of their biomarkers come back in range, symptoms of disease disappear, but you ask them if they're doing any exercise, whoa, no. I will dial in my 16-8 fasting regimen and get an engineering degree to figure out ways that I don't have to lift a single weight. And they wonder why the body recomposition is not happening. And it does require You can get to a certain level, but you do want to start building lean mass and putting on lean muscle. The Keto Gains guys are here. If you have questions about how to build muscle on keto, go into Keto Gains group. There is 70-year-old ladies in there with guns that are lifting weights. And I'm not saying they're getting jacked, but they are lifting and they are recomposing body. This is not something that's just for the meatheads. You go in that group and you see everybody who is on board with building muscle. That is as important, in my opinion, as the fat loss. And so I think it's something that's often overlooked. So I just wanted to hammer it here and mention it. I think it's an important marker, lean mass. Just, pounds lost is great, lean mass, even better. And Vanna here is going to demo the Oura Ring for us. And there's lots of devices that can track sleep. But if you're getting 4 hours of crappy sleep every night and you have sleep apnea, good luck with weight loss and the blood sugar control. Yes, sir.
David, I don't mean to interrupt. Is there an alternative to using the chest strap for getting an accurate heart rate?
Yes.
Yeah, the ring here actually does heart rate variability all through the night. And so you don't have to put the chest strap on. And I'm going to show Elite HRV. They're making a clamp on the finger. It's like something that you'd use a pulse ox. So they're making a device to do HRV and heart rate through just a finger clamp.
I was thinking of more of something that I could look at while I'm running or hiking.
You still have to put a chest strap on. Some of the Fitbits will do it, I think, and some of the wrist devices, but it's just not as accurate. So we'll get to that in a second. But there is the technology to help us measure our sleep is getting more sophisticated, the consumer technology. And so this is where you start to able to look at things like sleep stages and heart rate variability through the night, time spent in each sleep cycle, and we actually can start to influence these numbers. So this is actually my data here on the right. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that different things can improve the quality of the sleep. So for some people, it's a CBD oil or a 5-HTP supplement can actually have an improvement in sleep. Other days, I've noticed that if I'm not done eating by 6 p.m., it affects the quality of my sleep. My heart rate stays elevated later into the night. My lowest resting heart rate will come at 4 in the morning versus like 12 p.m. So I can see how food is affecting my digestion, how that carries into my sleep cycle, and I've changed my eating cycle. I've tried to finish eating by 5 every single day. Tonight, that's not going to happen. We're going for dinner. But most days, I know that that works best for my body. Getting an early bedtime, stress, alcohol, you will actually start to see what throws your sleep off. Really, really important. These devices cannot really detect apnea, but they can detect limb movement, and you'll start to see that show up in the quality of the data. And it's just incredibly helpful, especially for metabolic disorders, which is what we're all working on, is the quality of the sleep. Really, really easy to quantify. Tons of amazing technology out there. I mean, Aura's benchmarking the ring against like the polysomnograph tests in the sleep centers, right? This is really, really getting sophisticated, and you can just get it online, and you have more information about your sleep than your doctor would ever have, and you can start to optimize your lifestyle for optimal sleep. This is a completely different paradigm for how we think about healthcare. So then I'll just talk about heart rate variability. How many people have tracked HRV before in their life? Okay.
Number of hands.
Yeah, so this is basically the elapsed time between the heartbeat. And you used to have to go to the hospital and get rigged up to an EKG machine to check this data. Now you just buy a $59 Bluetooth heart rate monitor and fire up Elite HRV, and you get it for free. And this is actually one of the best indicators of the stress on the autonomic nervous system. And you can start to see how different stressors, whether they're emotional, work, relationship, whether they're toxins, whether it's stress from the gym, and again, you can start to course correct lifestyle to optimize these scores. This actually was largely Olympic athletes were doing this with Elite, and now it's starting to come mainstream where it's available to everybody. And you've probably seen that, but people are doing everything right on the diet, and the blood sugar is still high. There's a stress component to that, which may be the missing variable. Everybody is a different puzzle, and this may be a helpful piece of information. And again, this is just things I've noticed, right? Heavy training, I'll see HRV go down, and it'll take me a couple days to get back up.
Was that our night out?
That was, yeah, that could have been a late night out. And you pay the penalty for that. But you can see, like, once I get to this top spike here, and I'll see that data in the morning, my HRV last night was excellent, I know I'll be able to push my body to the max. So when my HRV is in the toilet, does that mean I'm not going to go to the gym? No, I might just go for a run instead of like doing a heavy CrossFit workout. So these are just ways I use the data to calibrate. This is extremely powerful technology that's just available now to the general consumer. And number 9, we would not be complete without a slide on poo. And you know you've reached the pinnacle of your career when you are presenting on stool. And so this is silly, but if you work with any good functional medicine doctor, they're going to want to know what was the Bristol score and what did you eat.
Right.
Why? They're trying to figure out if you have food sensitivities. And there was a study done where they put radioactive isotopes into the food, and they could check the transit time of the food through the system, and they would score it, and they could tell if you had food sensitivities. I remember the first time this was ever mentioned, it was this guy, Charles. He makes this electrostim device, and I can't remember what it was, but he was the first one to say that he had all of his clients keep a journal of what they ate and what their poop looked like.
Well, that's Charles in charge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Charles in charge. But he was trying to understand that client's digestion. And as crazy as this sounds, I actually look in the bowl. And I want to know that 3s and 4s are coming out in the bowl, because that means my digestion is working well. And if you are not, everyone's got leaky gut, microbiome, intestinal permeability.
Too much MCT.
Exactly. So there are simple things like the Bristol stool chart. There are conventional labs that can help you understand if there's gut microbiome issues going on. And then you may need to do some of the functional tests, like the organic acids is very insightful for understanding digestive issues. So the microbiome, that was the Israeli study. It was actually the microbiome that was predicting the postprandial glucose. So getting this in order, huge correlations with mental health, huge correlations with anxiety. So an important piece of the puzzle, and all you have to do is look in the toilet bowl. This one is nutrigenomics. And Nutrition Geno is a company that is providing these tests. And this will help you understand your genetic disposition and how that affects how you implement a ketogenic diet. And maybe you shouldn't even be on a high-fat diet. So understanding the genetic origins of your ancestry, understanding your genetic profile, that has a lot to do with how to properly tailor the diet. It's $299, and they will tell you everything about your genetic profile and how to change your diet accordingly. I have a sample report here from these guys. If anybody's interested, I can send it to you. It's incredible. And she uses it with every single client to figure out how to do keto.
Does that just do dietary information, or does that do disease, like?
They do all the SNPs, but they do interpretation on the nutritional access of the SNPs.
I also, we have to point out that, you know, pharmacological companies don't want you doing this, because this will also tell you that there are some drugs that will not work on you.
That's the 1-home test that does the drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to give you an example, I have the MTHFR mutation. Okay, so that means I am not methylated properly. And when I go to get my blood tests done, it's the homocysteine marker for me that is like off the charts. So the genetic mutation is the MTHFR. Is that mutation expressing itself or not? That shows up in the blood work. For me, it's homocysteine. And I've found the right combination of supplements that can bring that down in range. So that's the connection between like the genetic mutation, the expression of that gene, and then how we can start to address it as individual patients. Some supplements brought the homocysteine down, some didn't. I just tried them all. I probably could have found a practitioner to help me with that, but that's how I did it. Yeah, you want to speak?
Yeah, I mean, then you can bring in your labs
And as any doctor's going to tell you, the blood doesn't lie. And you can bring all of your trig, your HDL ratio that's going to come on. You want to make sure you're doing your HbA1c. You want to make sure what's going on with your fasting glucose. And the great thing is you are now empowered to do it yourself. And we're going to reiterate this again. You are empowered to do it yourself. You can order any test you like without your doctor asking for it. So if they don't want to do your NMR, do it. Know your particle size, because that is the most important piece that's going to come into play. And so it's so great that finally these tools have been put into your hands so you can make a difference to yourself.
Yeah, I remember I lived in Spartanburg, South Carolina for 3 months. I was doing some work down there. That's where Jimmy Moore lives. And we just go to the doctor. I had insurance, and I went to the doctor, and I'm like, you know, I haven't had any blood work for a while. I just made some stuff up. I'm having some symptoms after I eat high carb food, whatever. Refused to run the hemoglobin A1c for me. Absolutely
And that's
refused.
like a $20 test.
Yeah, no CPT code, can't do it. And they refused. And that's what everyone in that state probably is having to do. And you just go to private MD labs, requesttest.com, $20. My dad was going through some serious cardiovascular stuff. We wanted the fasting insulin. They wouldn't run it. No. Go buy it ourselves.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. So for us in the United States, we have this. In other countries, you can't even get access to these tests, unfortunately. So we're fortunate here. And the unmeasurables.
Love, 22 years of marriage. There is Mrs. Mojo right here. Big props. The love that can make sure that you're taken care of for a year if you want your company. Having fun with your community, your tribe, which is the keto world. Having fun. I mean, come on. We've talked a whole bunch of data, but we're having fun with it. We're having a glass of wine and we're enjoying time together. This is so important. Getting out. Miriam, you were talking about how you live in Montana, and to get out into the mountains is so important to you because you get that nature and you go back to where we were.
It's a fix.
Exactly. And that's, everybody talks about getting out and how important it is that, and having compassion for your fellow man. And I think in business this gets lost. They've forgotten. It's all about the buck. And you know, as myself, as only one half of Keto Mojo and the team that is out there, is we want to make a difference. We just don't want to leave this earth and saying, hey, we made a buck. You know, we want to actually kind of leave it better than we actually found it and be able to make that. And that only comes through having compassion and having, I like this one, spiritual fitness. Yep, oh, good point. We are, Mrs. Mojo is spearheading our foundation right now. And the goal of the foundation is that we will not only be putting up a percentage of our profits, but we're also working with our friends within the ketogenic community. And the goal of the foundation is that we will do matching grants for clinical trials and studies to advance the frontiers of ketogenic medicine. And at the same time, we also want to put some money into affecting policy and the work of what Nina Teicholz is doing with the Nutritional Coalition. And Peter Ballestedt is talking about doing farming. You know, the Farm Bill is the most boring piece of legislation in Congress, and yet it affects what everybody in America and globally eats. We are subsidizing obesity in America with the Farm Bill, and that has to change. When you, how many people saw Peter's talk this morning? That guy is a freaking rock star. When he actually really showed you that when people say that you cannot have pasture-raised protein, he proved it in that talk that the entire globe can eat in a healthy way. They can eat ketogenic, and we can actually reduce the costs down by doing that. And you know what? I give thanks to absolutely everybody in the ketogenic journey who supported us. I give thanks to Dave, who worked with me to say, like, when I didn't know how to do something, he came along and said, like, I can help you out, and we came together. And these are the unmeasurables, and it is the most important thing. And at the end of the day, I hope you all have a nice little glass of wine tonight. I hope you have a great dinner with your friends, and you give them a good old hug because they're well worth it.
Bring it in.
Yeah.
Questions?
For the keto module, if we already have the apparatus to sell, we need to connect to the app.
Yes, for everybody who already has a keto mojo, when we actually launch, you will have the opportunity as founder members to get it at an extremely advantageous price. And every meter already has the technology built in that it will be able to connect to the Bluetooth connector, and the app will be free. And then after that, we're going to be working with Dave and Heads Up Health. We're going to go and have it so that you can get onto Heads Up Health, you can have a trial, and you can check it out. And we'll be subsidizing that as well, because we really believe that getting that clinical data for those 5 million people will be an absolute game changer moving forward, especially with epidemiological studies.
You think you can change policy?
Hmm?
If you get that data, do you think you can change policy?
I think so, absolutely, yes. The question was, if we can get the data, can we change policy? Yeah, if you take a look at the Framingham study, it's only done by a few thousand nurses, but if you imagine that we have 5 million people who are sharing that data, you know, that's like, poof, mic drop right there, and all it takes is a little doodad like this that we will plug into the top of your meter like that. But more importantly than that, it's the code that Sebastian and Dave and his team have put together to make this happen. And it's just because we got over a nice steak and a glass of burgundy, wasn't it? It took a lot longer than we thought. Yes, sir.
What do you think insulin meters will be on the market?
That's a very good question. When will insulin meters be on the market?
On record here.
I said last year 3 years. It has proven to be inherently more difficult than I thought it would be. The amount of blood that is required for the draw, the photochromatic assay that is needed, the time to actually get the result, the actual accuracy of the results is not where I thought it would be, and the actual cost to bring that to market is a lot more than I expected. So what we are actually doing is that we will be using the profits as we grow to be able to reinvest into that pace. So I think it will hopefully, as we gain greater profits, we can reinvest it to try and get you an instant result.
So LIDAR won't be another method?
It's potential. We're looking at all different methods to try and find out how to do it. But if I can find the way, I'll do it, and I'll bring it to market, and I will not charge biotech margins, because we truly believe that we need that trilogy of glucose, ketones, and insulin.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
When I first got my meter, I was kind of surprised to see hematocrit and hemoglobin on there. Grateful for it. But if I remember the instructions, it kind of was dismissive of don't worry about this. Now, since some of my results were low, I couldn't help it.
Right. Hematocrit, the bane of my life. You know, when the engineers told me that, oh, we could put hematocrit on there, I was like a magpie to a piece of bling on that one there. Like, oh, that'd be fantastic. Let's throw it on the meter. But hematocrit bounces around, and what you will actually find, it changes even between heartbeat and between fingers. So it's sort of like you've got to look at the trend over the time. It's going to be the n equals 100, not the 1-to-1. Hematocrit will change by age, sex, altitude, and hydration. So there's too many factors that is in there. In hindsight, I think that I should have buried it a little bit and allow you to unlock it with kind of like, hey, take it with a pinch of salt, look at it over a long period of time. You know, people look at these numbers, and like they were saying about the fixation of the numbers, is we need to look at the trend as to what's going to